This week's episode of the Cloudcast is brought to you by Intel Cloud for All, driving the creation of thousands of clouds.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to another Cloudcast. We are actually coming to you live from Amazon Web Services 2015 out here in Las Vegas. Aaron, we're actually doing one together.
I know.
We rarely ever see each other.
We're both here. We are sitting in the hall, crouched in a corner at AWS.
Yeah, right before the keynote. We had to go find a quiet place before the keynote. And we're joined by actually new good friend of the show, and we just found out new listener of the show, Bridget Kromhout. I don't even know what title to give you, because when we first met, so I'll put it this way, you run all the DevOps days. If you're at Velocity, you're there. You're now working for Pivotal, but as we were talking yesterday, I don't even know what title to say that you have over there.
Sure, okay.
What title do you want to give yourself? How's that?
All right, hi. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
So, Bridget, welcome to the show. What should we address you? Because you cover so many things. You're speaking. You've got operational experience. You've got builder experience. What does Pivotal want to call what you're doing?
You've joined the Pivotal posse.
That's right.
Yes, thank you. I'm really glad to be here. Thanks, folks. So at Pivotal, my business cards say Principal Technologist. If you ask Andrew Clay Schaefer what he hired me to do, he'll tell you it's choose your own adventure. And what I'm really excited about is this idea of, I've been at ops for a long time, and I just recently hung up the pager. I figure if you're on call for production infrastructure from 1999 to 2015, you probably need a break.
Yeah.
Yes.
My partner Joe actually says that he no longer wakes up to any of the ringtones I use. It's like he's trained himself to sleep through them.
It's like people, they don't hear the airplane or the train or...
Exactly. But yeah, so at Pivotal, because I've spent a lot of stuff I spent a lot of time, rather, building and operating systems at some level of scale. It's kind of nice to look at a lot of those patterns and primitives and then see what I can learn about stuff I never got a chance to play with, and then what I can help other people understand about how they can make their systems hopefully more operable, or at least page them less.
Yeah. So, you mentioned you've been doing this since, before the 2000s. You're doing it back in, before they called it DevOps, right? It was just
definitely
SysAdmin. It was just, running IT. It was whatever. What, because you're super involved in the DevOps community. I mean, you're like you said, you're heavily involved in the DevOps days. You're kind of really involved with being a thought leader. Like, what flipped that all of a sudden you got involved with this, what they're calling DevOps these days?
Okay, so first of all, I feel like thought leader is one of those things that it makes the back of my neck itch.
Yeah.
And if I meet people who have it in, their Twitter profile, I take them aside and say, you should really not put that in your Twitter profile. It kind of makes you sound like you read your own press releases. Yeah, I was a curmudgeonly sysadmin, and when I left a large research university and went to go work at a startup that was all developers and me,
yeah,
I had to cooperate with them. It was kind of like, if you want to learn a language, you immerse yourself by just moving to the country when you know nothing.
Right.
I moved to developer land,
Yep.
and I learned a lot from them. Git. I had never used it. It was 2012, and I had never used Git because I was a sysadmin. Why would I?
Yeah.
Right.
I was a crotchety old sysadmin. And it's like, no, there's a lot that operations can learn from, like the ideas of, infrastructure as code, of having your infrastructure and your configurations be repeatable and versioned, having your deployments be, discrete versioned entities that you can roll forward and roll back. Like, there's many things that make systems way more operable that people can take from this whole, DevOps movement. And that's, of course, not to say that DevOps is all about tooling, since it's, as you mentioned, I'm involved with DevOps Days, and we talk a lot about culture at DevOps Days. Because just like I had to learn to not just say, oh, you cowboy devs, you just want to YOLO that right out into production. I had to learn to understand why they wanted to see their code deployed.
Right.
Which, spoiler alert, we all hate waiting.
Yeah. And that was actually part of the AWS kind of keynote yesterday was, that was a big focus. If I felt like last year was nothing about, it was a very developer focused keynote. This year was very much I felt like it was patch the holes in the enterprise or do the pain in the enterprise kind of thing. And it really fit into a lot of those philosophies without a doubt. And I've been maybe somewhat critical of AWS in the keynotes over the years. But I was surprised by yesterday's a bit.
Well, I think they finally, they reached they've always built things as components. They've always built them as tools, and as much as they call it a platform, it's not a platform in the exact same sense as like Pivotal or with Cloud Foundry, where it's sort of lots of things are in there. It's been a lot of you build these things. So you were, we had talked a few months ago. We were going to try to have you on before. You built a platform, right? You're artisanally crafted, grass-fed, gluten-free. Talk about what you were doing at your previous job before you went to Pivotal, and why you guys built one, and then maybe why you're thinking a different way these days.
Absolutely. Well, I think the way I'm thinking, it really hasn't shifted much. It's just all a continuum, right? So, I was using AWS even at the job before Drama Fever. There was, at AWS, there are, as you mentioned, a lot of composable pieces.
Right.
It's kind of a bag of sharp objects. You can poke yourself if you're not careful, but there's a lot of composable pieces you can put your platform together from. I would definitely say I don't think AWS is an opinionated platform. It's more a collection of tools,
right,
some of which provide great managed services. The managed services at AWS are, I would say, super handy if you don't want to spend a lot of time, say, having a DBA. If you don't really need that, you just need a database. So when I was at Drama Fever, I've been at Pivotal for about 6 weeks, and the year before that, I spent at this streaming video startup that was much like Netflix, if Netflix were much smaller and mostly Korean soap opera and ran Docker in production.
Yeah.
As one does.
Sure.
Checks all the boxes. Yeah, there you go.
When I joined there was actually no configuration management. There was just Docker, which was delightful because containers are great, except for the part where that doesn't actually help you with anything on your host instances.
Yeah.
So it was we had the janky bash that, if run correctly and then filled in with all the things that somebody forgot, would probably make the AMI the way we wanted it. And then if we screwed it up, well, I guess we would be re-rolling out, the entire infrastructure because we set up an AMI that accidentally wasn't using NXLog at all. Stuff like that. So we thought, you're laughing because this is exactly the sort of thing you do when you're doing things too manually, right?
Yeah.
And so my coworkers, the folks that were working on this at Drama Fever with me, Tim Gross, who he actually left right before I did. He's doing product at Joyent now. And Pete Shannon, who is still at Drama Fever. I'll be giving him a talk with him at Velocity New York next week. The last hurrah for me on this particular case study.
Yeah.
And I were, as well as the other folks on the ops team, were building, but these were the main people working on the platform stuff. We ended up using Chef and using Packer to build AMIs that we defined via Chef, having that all run after the GitHub commits went into Chef, having Jenkins automatically pump out these AMIs and create the launch configs. Just kind of abstracting away some of those pieces that you certainly can do by hand every time. But then, if you make the launch config by hand one time, you might forget that you actually wanted to set a spot price for that one.
Yeah.
Because, for that particular auto-scaling group or whatever, it's there's a lot of these pieces that it's easy to forget if you're leaving it up to humans. As it turns out, computers are really good at doing the same thing every time. Humans, less so.
Not so much. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I think there's so many events these days, and then you've got some of the vendor. You go to DockerCon, you're going to talk about Docker. But you go to Velocity, and you're going to, or if you go to ChefCon, you're going to talk, or Chef, you're going to talk about Chef. You go to PuppetCon.
I actually talked at my coworker Pete and I talked about Docker at ChefConf.
Right. Well,
what we wanted to talk about was how you can use these pieces together to build a platform.
Well, and you almost have to, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it sort of leads to where you're going now, which is, people get, like I've been talking about this sort of structured, unstructured thing about platforms for a little bit, and obviously a lot of the folks in your team have as well. I think people get caught up and they go, okay, Docker sounds cool. It does certain things. And sometimes people think it's a VM replacement, and sometimes they think it's an orchestration replacement, and sometimes it's just it's a thing that you put your config files in.
Everyone wants to put something in a box. It's it's the replacement for X. OpenStack is the replacement for VMware. Docker is the replacement for VMware. It's like,
or it's the replacement for Chef, or it's the replacement for.
These things are not even. They're not the same thing. They're not drop-in replacements for sure.
When a lot of the new technologies come along, in order to understand them, they immediately want to relate it to something.
Right. So you've had a lot of ops background. You went over to Pivotal. You're working on the Cloud Foundry team with Andrew and James and all those folks. Like, was one of your initial inclinations to go, I want to hang out with your ops team and know what the product does so I can go talk about it like intelligently, or is that itch gone away and you're like, no, I calamine lotioned that away. I'm just going to go. I don't want to go back to that.
Funny you should ask. So my first week at Pivotal, I actually spent embedded with the Cloud Ops team, and worked with them side by side. Tony Hansman's team, they run Pivotal Web Services. It's the hosted offering where the Pivotal hosts on AWS for customers who don't want to run it themselves. They just want to have kind of like, just CF push and they're done. And it was really fun working with them. One thing that was really different was Pivotal, as you may be aware, but perhaps all your listeners for the Cloudcast are not, is very into the capital A Agile. So it's all Agile, XP, like pair programming all the way. They also do pair ops, which I think is fascinating because that is not usual.
Yeah. Right.
Like that's not normally a thing. Usually,
what does that mean? Like, what does that mean in practice?
Like you wonder, how can that even work? How it actually works at Pivotal is you have two ops people. They have a keyboard in front of each of them and a monitor in front of each of them, and it's connected to the same computer. And they talk to each other and take turns driving. And it actually is a really interesting way of solving problems, right?
Yeah.
Because you know how a yak shave can be. And you can end up going down these rabbit holes that suck up a lot of time, and then you've popped so many layers off the stack that you're not even sure you have the context for where you started with the problem you were trying to solve.
I'm thinking back to my days when I was working in like tech support, and you'd have a problem that would come in, things are on fire, and you'd have a cluster of people standing behind the one person on the keyboard, and they'd all kind of want to be going, no, try this and try that, and
right.
It'd be weird to like how you think about your brain.
Two minds on the problem.
Right.
Maybe one person is thinking through the next thing you should try, while the first person is trying that first thing.
So
it's fascinating, but it fits the Pivotal philosophy really well. But anyway, so I got to spend a week with Cloud Ops, which was a great way to get to understand the product a little better.
Yeah.
There was a client who was doing a POC on Azure, actually.
Yeah.
So can we say Azure here at reInvent? We're big on AWS, but got to do what the clients are interested in.
Cloud's a cloud, right?
Yep. And I mean, Cloud Foundry, you can put it on private cloud, public cloud, whatever. Like it's kind of cloud agnostic, as long as you have reasonable APIs that it can talk to, so it can provision stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, so working through a problem, like it was really interesting to actually participate. And I actually want to go back. I'm hoping when conference season calms down for a little while, the Cloud Ops team really would like to have me come back to San Francisco for a week or two and spend more time with them.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
Does conference season ever calm down?
You were telling us about your schedule. I don't know when you're going to get to.
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, yeah. So now through Thanksgiving is pretty packed. For people who would like to see me at something, I will be at Velocity New York, Velocity EU. I'll be at Cloud Foundry Summit in Berlin, though I'm not speaking at that. Just there supporting Cloud Foundry, supporting the foundation. They do amazing work. And then I'm going to come back from that and be at Recon, where I'm speaking. And then a couple weeks after that, I'll be speaking at QCon in SF.
Yeah.
And after that, I'm pretty sure I have nothing booked out conference-wise. And I'm actually legit, like completely okay with that.
Yeah.
I would like to spend a little bit of time at home on my couch petting my cat.
And if I remember this right, you're the DevOps Against Humanity originator, am I right? You guys have that in common. He was telling me last night he was up late playing Cards Against Humanity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, gosh.
In the lobby of the Cosmo.
Yeah, it's funny. One of the vendors was actually mentioning that they did print up a bunch of copies of. It was my company.
Oh,
fantastic!
So you're now working. You're sort of focused. We were talking yesterday. You're focused around the Cloud Foundry platform, but obviously you've got a lot of background, so you're not sort of kind of pushed in that direction, right? At least for now. If you ran into somebody at one of these events and they said, "Look, we are, I don't know, X size, or we have these guys," like what are the parameters for people to sort of say, like, should we build, right? There's a little bit with the at least the Pivotal team where it's sort of like nobody should build, right? You talked a little bit about there's a hierarchy or like what would you say are like the good kind of, I don't know, jumping off points where you reach here, it's not going to make any sense.
There's always a point where level of effort versus return on
what
effort.
are the general things that people might consider?
Right. Okay. So if you want to build a platform, and you have very specific use cases that are not well met by any of the more opinionated offerings out there, and it doesn't have to be Cloud Foundry, there's a number of them, but if you have specific needs that are not met by the continued work that the folks are doing in, anything in the container ecosystem, and it looks to you like perhaps, I don't know how to put this, because I feel like this answer depends a lot on the size of your organization. Because if you're a really small organization to the point where you're just giving everyone prod AWS keys, you probably don't need the role-based access controls in something like Cloud. The more structured platforms that have a more narrow constraint of opinions, certainly a few knobs that you can turn, but a more narrow list of things that you can or should do in them, I think are really well suited to very large organizations where they have 500 developers who would all like to push something to this platform. And it becomes an administrative overhead and a lot more configuration to make that work versus just giving everybody a few keys and saying, hey, just make sure every time you build, you do this first. Like, you can get away with that on a small scale. And I assure you, if you build a platform, there will always be corner cases like that.
Right.
And you can get away with that on a small scale. And I would say when you get to whatever scale, you're not going to be able to say on Slack, hey, I think I broke the build. I definitely broke the build. Hang on a minute. If you get to a point where you cannot say that,
right,
you probably need a more structured approach.
I think that's what Mark was saying last week when he said, like, usually when you're small, when it's really just like just focus on the business, don't worry about focusing on the platform, then you probably do it for a while, and hopefully if you do it well, the business gets big enough and you go, we've got multiple groups, or we've got you bring somebody in, because I think that's what a lot of people are trying to figure out is, they're not only trying to figure out what do these new applications look like, but if you're running ops, you're running infrastructure, you're running whatever, like what should I be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough question, right? Because at Drama Fever, we were a 5-person ops team, and it certainly felt like there were always a million things to do that we didn't have time to get to.
Right.
We wanted to get to more application container clustering. We were starting to look at projects like, Mesos and Kubernetes, but those are a lot of work. It was actually, there was a really funny infographic about tree houses that Andrew Clay Schaefer tweeted that you probably saw. Where he had a picture of a tree house. He was like, I'm going to explain opinionated and unopinionated platforms. He had a picture of a tree house, and he had a picture of some 2x4s. It
was like a lumberyard, yeah.
Yep. And it was like, here's an unopinionated treehouse. And then it was great because, of course, Kelsey Hightower, who's brilliant and amazing, replied and said, well, Kubernetes isn't really like the 2x4s. It's more like if you have 10 different ladders you can pick. And I'm like, you're making Andrew's point for me, Kelsey. So even in small orgs, there's probably a lot of people who spend a lot of time building something that they don't really need to. So looking at, and this is, I'm not Waters, so I don't have to beat the Pivotal drum at all times and tell you must buy some Cloud Foundry. And I would say if you're a small startup, you probably aren't going to buy some Cloud Foundry. Right. You might want to look at the open source project. Like, there might be things in there, the kind of stuff, these are patterns that are well-established patterns by this point that folks like Netflix have been doing for ages. Things like circuit breakers. Things like auto recovery when some instances go away. We're talking about Amazon, even though it's so much better than it was in mid 2012. I remember instances would just stop responding, and you're like, "That's great. That was a database master."
Yeah.
And at this point, well, hopefully you're using RDS or whatever anyway, instead of say running MongoDB on AWS because reasons.
Well, and there's parallels to it. I mean, like Andy Jassy got on stage yesterday and said, "Look, we have all these different RDS database options. It's $1 billion business. I mean, it says that people are basically kind of going, even on AWS, which, like you said, is still, some sharp objects and lots of pieces. Like, they're still wanting somebody to help them do something, or machines help them do something.
And AWS is, way more reliable and stable than it was.
Right.
It's probably a lot more reliable and stable than a lot of the stuff in a lot of people's data centers. Certainly, you don't have to RMA stuff yourself, which is nice. Right. Yeah. But don't miss that.
Yeah. So I think we're going to get bumped up by the keynote. It's either going to get really loud, which we hate to cut you off. You're a podcaster as well, in your copious free time.
My copious free time.
What are you guys talking about? What's your show? People are we always hear our listeners go like, well, we listen to you, but what else should we listen to? Like, what are you guys doing?
I co-host Arrested DevOps with Matt Stratton and Trevor Hess. And we talk to people about all facets of DevOps-related stuff, and not necessarily just tools. Though we did have Emma Jane Westby on, who wrote the Git for Teams book for O'Reilly, and we had her on talking about Git. Yeah. And Git, another sharp object, but something that you can get a lot of value out of if you can figure out how to make it work for you. But then we talk about anything from failure in distributed systems to cognitive neuroscience and how we can kind of hack our minds to increase our empathy for other people. Yeah. It's just there's a lot of good topics. It's the sort of stuff that you can kind of pop in, pop out, listen to whichever ones sound interesting.
Yeah, it's absolute must listen on mine, and then another one too is the Pivotal podcast as well, because you were just on there recently with I think it was Cote, right?
Cote is great. He does his own podcast. My coworker Michael Cote.
He's like an empire of podcasts.
He does. Yeah. He is kind of a podcasting overlord.
Software-defined talk, I think, is his other
Software-defined talk is great. I enjoy that one on planes as well as a Cloudcast. I feel like those are good ways to not be annoyed by the flight. That one's good. The Pivotal Conversations podcast, where if you go to pivotal.io/podcasts, he's talked to a lot of pivotal and non-pivotal people about interesting stuff. I think he just started a new podcast with Matt Curry from Allstate called Lords of Computing or something.
I saw something about that one. I hadn't listened to that one.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, we talked about the whole thought leader thing and making your. So there are certain things that I want to say the DevOps community, but like there's certain things when people go like it's the DevOps team or you do what are those 2 or 3 things that people, if they're just kind of going, look, I was a sysadmin, I kind of want to get in this space because I want to do automation and I want to collab. Like, what are those 2 or 3 things that you just don't do those things?
I think the most important thing to remember is that DevOps is not something that you can buy. I mean, people will be happy to sell it to you, but it's not something you can buy. And it's not something that one person can just decide to be or do. If you don't just hire yourself a DevOps and then you have DevOps and everything is DevOps because, rub some DevOps on it. Like, that's not a thing.
DevOps certified.
That's also not a thing, as much as people would like to make it a thing. Because the whole point is it's a cultural movement towards cooperation and understanding to increase the velocity, efficiency, happiness, whatever you want to call it, of your IT organization. So if we're all trying to improve, like the whole Kaizen thing, like continuous improvement, if we're all trying to improve, like that means we have to listen to each other. We have to learn from each other. I mean, to me, that's what DevOps is. And I really think that people who would like to buy some tools to help them with that, there's lots of vendors that would be happy to sell them those tools. I mean, I work for one of them, but just having an engagement with a vendor is not going to give it to you. Though it's certainly, there are vendors out there like Jez Humble, like ThoughtWorks, like Pivotal, that will also do engagements where we attempt to help you through your IT transformations. Right. So I would say, like, if you would like to write someone a large check to help you through an IT transformation, you probably should hire someone to help you with your culture before you hire someone to give you a tool.
Right. Yeah. Get the people side of it. Well, listen, we could talk about a lot of stuff. I think, like I said, we're going to get drowned out here in a second.
Here it comes.
Oh, there it goes. So I'm going to tell everybody this. If you're listening, we are going to do the absolute best we can to edit this. There may be some funky stuff in here. You may hear some background noise. We thought we had found the quietest place possible, and then we found out it was not. But anyways, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. This was great fun.
I mean, obviously, like you talked about, you're going to be all over the place. Are you cool? Like if people just want to come up and talk to you and meet you and all that stuff? Yeah. You're easy to find. You've got the blonde hair with the beautiful pink fuchsia highlights. And
I am happy to provide pink-haired thought leadership as a service to anyone who would like to, discuss it with me.
Right.
So
very cool.
tell them find me on Twitter.
Yep.
If they send me email, it will probably take me weeks to answer them because that's life. But find me on Twitter, talk to me at a conference, or just listen to Arrested DevOps.
Yeah, very cool. Well, for that, we're going to wrap it up for the day.
Yes.
Good to see you. Maybe I'll see you in a month or so.
Yeah,
And,
exactly. See you at the Cloudcast Christmas party.
Yeah, absolutely. So, folks, thanks for listening, and we're out.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.